Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Gig Member Q&A call. Today is Tuesday, September 17th, 2024. Your host, James Cronk and Scott Massey with you. And James, we have two of my favorite people joining us today on the call with Three Jackie Carpenter as our guests. And we're going to have a great governance chat, if you will, today. More specifically, talk about the club manager's role and responsibility as it relates to educating board members. So when it comes to educating your board, we're going to get into what to focus on and how to do it. Because as we know, board members often have their personal expertise in their own fields, but sometimes that can really lead to misconceptions about club management. And fair to say that oftentimes board members get certain ideas in their head, or they have certain expectations about outcomes without really understanding the unique operational challenges of a club environment. And we know this can cause a lot of issues for club managers as they try to these board members rather try to apply their knowledge, their industry specific knowledge to the not for profit club setting, which obviously operates under a completely different set of guidelines and principles. So I'm really looking forward to today's call, and as always, it's great anytime we get to connect with Three Jackie, so really looking forward to it.
Scott, are you running for office? Because that was the most politically correct description that I've ever heard about the dysfunction that happens sometimes with boards and governance. That was brilliantly put. We didn't talk about this before.
That's how you and I do things, though, right? Like I go politically correct, and then you just take it off the rails. So that's what I'm looking forward to here. I set you up to hit it out of the park.
I one time had to deal with a board member that said because they ate in restaurants, they knew how to run a restaurant. And I thought that was very fascinating. But I'm getting back to you, and I agree with you. Three Jackie Carpenter, the last time we had them on here, it was for People First. They are so wonderfully positive, energetic, supportive leaders and communicators that do so much great work in the club space. We're going to learn all about that when we have them on. In a moment, but you're right. Today, we're talking about governance. We're talking about managing your board from Three's standpoint as a manager, and then from Jackie's background, from as a communicator, as an author, as writer. And she's got a great new platform. She's going to tell us all about with Notable that is really a resource that a club manager can use to bring boards and GMs and COOs together so that they are all, singing from the same song sheet, as we like to say. So without further ado, let's bring on our very special guest once again. It's great to have Three Jackie Carpenter back. Hello.
Hey, guys.
Hello. We're so glad to be here.
It is always great to have you guys on board. It's always great to chat with you. Our last podcast that we did, maybe, my goodness, I don't know, Scott, a year and a half ago, maybe more than that.
Time flies.
Had lots and lots of great feedback and views from our listeners and from Gig Nation. And so it's always great to have you guys back, and we've got new things to talk about. So, but for those of our listeners, if it's even possible that people don't know, have not heard of Three Jackie Carpenter, I don't know where you're operating in, but tell our listeners a little bit more about yourselves, and take your time, please.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you guys so much. We love talking to you. We love hanging out with Gig Nation. So this gives us our energy for the month. So thank you. We're excited to be here. So Three and I have spent our entire careers in the club industry, and which is, you're probably thinking, oh my gosh, they're so young. That probably isn't very long, but Three has actually been a general manager for more than 30 years. This is club number 8. 3, right? 8. Yeah, club number 8 on the general manager tour across the country. I worked in private clubs for almost 10 years as more of the clubhouse manager, culture czar type role, membership director at a couple places. And then was the editor of the Private Club Advisor for 12 years. And as James mentioned, the Private Club Advisor unfortunately was forced to shut down a few months ago. So I created my own publication called Notable, which we'll talk more about later. But it is intended to really provide some education for general managers and board members. So like I said, we'll talk more about that later. And then in addition to Three and I living the club life, we're also authors, that's a tongue twister, of the book People First, that really talks about, it's a roadmap essentially for enhancing your culture and elevating your employee experience. So thank you guys so much for having us. Three, did I miss anything?
No, I thought that was quite comprehensive. Very well done.
Now, I know that a couple things. I mean, first of all, People First, let's just talk about that for a second, because it is a wonderful, wonderful book that every leader should read. And when I'm following you guys on social media, I mean, you're really going outside of just the club world when it comes to your book, because it really is about culture creation and about employees. And what I remember us talking about it when you guys were first about to publish the book. Am I right? It was like coming out of COVID. It was like in that time, right? And and the importance, and who knew, right? Who knew that the way that you help people and manage people and you know, empathy is now the #1 word that we all use in leading people. You guys were at the forefront, really, when you were doing it. Was that fair to say?
Absolutely. We don't like to say this, but sort of reference this, that COVID was really perfectly timed to our book coming out, because, you know, pre-COVID, we felt like People First was the competitive advantage. And we wrote the book with that kind of intention, right? Of like, if you want to be different, you want to be better, this is what you have to do. And the world shifted so dramatically that today it's a necessity. People expect that you will have a people first culture. And if you don't, your organization's probably really struggling. So, so yes, thank you. It was kind of perfectly timed. So
yeah, it was. And really what we're talking about today is no different in the sense that, you know, People First, I know fundamentally is employees and about your team and culture. But as we talk about, you know, if that doesn't fit with the culture of the board or the culture of the club or the why, if your why is not the same why as that of the board or the members, then there's going to be some challenges. And Three, you're a bit of a poster child now when you just mentioned that 8 clubs in 30 years, you are bucking the average, right, of a good term, right? Because the reality is that, you know, when we talk about the average tenure of a club manager in North America, right around that 3-year mark, a little bit under that 3-year mark, and we could have a whole other topic about the benefits and pros and cons of that, because there are lots of pros and cons of that, as you know. And because I know, Three, one of the things that you love to do is to go and get clubs better, right? You're not a maintainer, you're a fixer. And you know, Scott and I would say the same. We don't want to be somewhere for 10 years. There's no fun in that. We want to take something, make it great, and then make it better. And so Three, let's ask you about the importance of educating, you know, your board of directors, right, on the role of the club manager. Like, let's just get started with that. About where do you start when you go into a club? How does the process kind of start?
Well, thank you. I got to tell you, you know, it's really interesting, and I think you teed that up really, really well. You know, when we wrote the book, obviously the focus is completely on that employee side. Both of those things are 2 strong foundational components. So for a club to have, you know, great success and great strength, a really amazingly strong employee culture is one half, and that's what the People First, you know, kind of mindset is. The other half is strong governance, you know, relative to the club. And when you think about, you know, when you look at like your board members, these are smart, successful business people mostly. These are people, again, who are bright and understand, but why do we believe, because of their success in insurance or medicine or real estate or whatever, that they know one thing about a club other than how they feel about their hamburger or missing the putt on 18, right? So the importance of that kind of education, that leadership from all of us that sort of get paid to do this, we've got to play offense, not defense. And educating your board is playing offense. We're leading everyone towards, like in the clubs I've been at, I very rarely talk about my club. I talk about the industry, best practices versus kind of reinventing the wheel. Every time a club says to me or says to any other manager or says to some consultant in the private club industry, well, I hear you, but our club is completely unique. Every time that's said, they're wrong. A, they're probably not actually unique. And B, if they're actually doing something unique and there are 7,000 other clubs in North America doing it the other way, I think we can assume they're still wrong. And so at the end of the day, using best practices from the industry is really the power and the strength. So for me, and obviously I'm married to, a really fabulous resource in this industry, but I use every magazine, every article, every speech, every company that's out there providing really good education. And every time, every committee, every board meeting, I talk about over and over and over, industry best practice, whatever it is. And we show those things, we talk about it, and we really try to help lead the board to what's happening in the industry, not what's happening inside these walls.
Yeah. And I would just kind of add to that, you guys, educating the board is really important because, you're kind of aligning your vision, your goals, where you're headed, where you've been with where you're going, and kind of keeping everybody on the right track. That doesn't happen by accident, right? That takes major intention and effort. And when you can get informed decision-making happening at your clubs, that's one of the reasons that I, did the private club advisor for so long, is I felt like kind of a teacher, to the industry, right? Is because we're teaching board members about what's happening so they can make better decisions for their club. When it comes to financial aspects, club improvements, member service, all of that leads to, when we have better decisions, it leads to more effective governance. And really kind of helping them understand operational challenges, being able to better create better member satisfaction. And that's really what we're all about. So, I would argue that educating a board is probably one of the most crucial things a general manager can really do, because their decisions impact every aspect of the club.
And Jackie, well, both of you, with private club advisor previously and now notable, which we'll talk about in a bit, which is the new and improved,
the new sexy version.
Sexy version. There's one.
Inside joke.
We're going to use the word sexy at least 3 times in today's, because governance is sexy, ladies and gentlemen, and we're going to make sure everyone knows that. Thank you very much. What are, besides I don't like the French fries, what are the kind of common gaps of knowledge? Like, so when you're thinking about content, or you're thinking about, here's some areas that we need to focus on, here's some areas, especially when you have a turnover, you've got a new hopefully you're onboarding your new board members and you're going through an onboarding process. But, in your experiences, what do you think are the most common gaps in knowledge that you see? And
Yeah, 3, I'll start and then I'll throw it to you. So I would say one is operational understanding. So many board members do not understand, staffing, member expectations, the number of hours an outlet is open, and how, all of that really functions, from service expectations to day-to-day, all of that. The operational piece, I think, is a big gap. Even though they may have been members for how many years, there's a lot of intricacies, behind the scenes to the way a club is run. So I would say that's a big one. And then secondly, I would say financial aspect is a big gap, where there's a lack of knowledge and understanding of really the uniqueness of a private club. And while, 3, I'm going to throw it to you in one sec. I just want to say, while clubs over the last couple of decades have evolved to become more business driven, a club is still very different from a for-profit business. And that is something that we definitely need to consider. That decisions at private clubs aren't always made based on financial results. they're probably more often made on member satisfaction and what that's going to look like. And so that is a huge disconnect. Go ahead, Three. I'll throw it to you.
No, I was going to actually just go right where you just went. It is counterintuitive for the business person to imagine this place should exist for no profit.
Right.
That just doesn't even make sense to anybody, right? And so that is probably the largest gap. You make decisions here because of how they make people feel. You don't make decisions here based just on the bottom line. It just doesn't work. And frankly, because of that, the expenses at clubs are pretty static. I mean, no one wants to believe that, but they really, really are. Whereas the win in these clubs is revenue generation. It's almost the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
It's focusing on bringing in that side. And the other things too, when you talk about the big gaps of thinking, there are many, many people who will say, oh, well, I've been on a ton of corporate boards. I mean, this is my thing. Ouch.
Mm-hmm.
Because at the end of the day, that means everything they've learned, you almost got to unlearn, because sitting in these boardrooms at a club, the conversations are different. And not that we shouldn't be bringing in best practices from businesses as well as other clubs. We certainly should be. And that is an advantage, but they've got to understand these decisions made on feelings, not just on the logic of business. And the other thing I would tell you that I think is funny, as an example, I tell this story to all of my boards and committees. Somebody will say, well, it's a restaurant. On my last board of directors, I had 3 people called doctor. One was a dentist, one was a PhD, and one was a cardio surgeon, right? All 3 are called doctor. All 3 do 3 completely different things. The word restaurant is sweet, but what we do is we have club dining rooms that are open to everyone's whim. That is completely different than restaurant, as just a perfect example.
Yeah. I would add, if I may, to what my perspective is that so often people get on boards and they don't even understand what is the role of the board.
Right.
Like they think that their job is to, once again, like, I want to change the French fries and I think the tennis courts need to be open at 2 a.m. in the morning. But what we're spending so much time trying to do with them from the very beginning is let them understand that no. You're not supposed to get involved in operations. You're supposed to set policy. You're supposed to set vision. You're supposed to establish culture. How are we going to replace the irrigation system in 8 years when we right now can't afford to buy a mower, or we're spending $4 million on our restaurant, and yet no one wants to spend the $20 million it's going to cost to do the irrigation system, because there's nothing sexy about irrigation systems. But there's lots of things that are sexy for. About
your extra credit sexies now. Okay, we get it. Yeah.
Okay. About a new patio, right? About a new patio. So I think that. So my next question, I think, is actually, I think it's yeah. So and the kind of the next 2 are together, really, which is about communicating to your board. How do you get them? How do you get them to have these conversations? How do you communicate the club's culture and vision to the board? And then the next question, Scott, is kind of connected together, please, which is, throw that up there. Because really, like, how do you get the buy-in? Is really these 2 questions are the same. How do you get them to buy in to be not talking about French fries, and to instead be talking about vision, long-term planning, strategic planning, culture, strategic plans, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, hey, I'll start with that. So, for me, it's coming into these clubs and just always playing kind of offense in the boardroom, right? Talking about the industry as a whole, doing things where we say, look, folks, you guys know in your own businesses, you are talking about planning and how that impacts the direction and creating a roadmap for where we're all going. You guys know the importance of that every day. Why in the world would we not think like that, in this operation? We're always going back to those themes and talking about painting the picture of where the club's going, and incorporate that vision in kind of that in regular communication with the board all the time, whether it's a board meeting, a board update, reports you could be doing, etc. I mean, there's just so many different ways. For me, I'm a storyteller. You guys will laugh because I'm chatty, but I like the idea of telling stories that share data, demonstrate how the culture impacts the club's success, employee culture, member culture. Right now at our club, I've been here about a year and a half. We are reinventing the member culture a bit by cleaning up some member behavioral issues, just like clubs are having all over North America. Excuse me, by drawing a harder line in the sand. Excuse me, guys, got a little cold. Anyway, so we're always reminding people on the board where we're going with that and why those things matter so much. Ultimately, we're aligning our strategic decisions with the vision. So if somebody wants to start talking about carrots, it would be quick for us to change the narrative to, I'll make sure that the staff and ultimately the House Committee have some conversations about that, next, and try and take people down that direction. And I will say it's hard, but the general manager, and even when it comes to committees, not just boards, I've got a new superintendent as an example. And the first few meetings we had the chair run the meetings, but the reality is now that he's been here a few months, starting next month, the superintendent will now run every facet of those meetings. Not that the chair doesn't matter, they do, but we're the professionals. We should be doing that, leading these meetings, right? So anyway, Jackie, throw it at you.
Yeah, well, and when it comes to, this external industry trends, that's kind of my jam, right? Of that's kind of what I do. And so that's where general managers can really bring in these outside resources and be pulling in what's happening, like Three's been talking about, and what's happening outside of the club's four walls. So articles, white papers, using publications like Notable. There's a dozen others that are out there that are sharing statistics and stories and success stories of other clubs and, the things that they're doing that are really talking about the industry as a whole. How clubs are evolving with technology, what membership trends look like, other benchmarking statistics, because I think the hang up really becomes when boards get way too focused on how the carrots are being cut, right? On what's happening within our four walls versus where are we going? What are we doing? What's the big picture? And so really reminding them of their roles and their responsibilities, just like you said, Three, when the conversation goes off topic or starts getting too operationally focused, I think that's where there has to be some accountability on the board, with the GM to say, hey, we're off topic. Yeah, well, I'm on the carrots. Let's not worry about it. Let's talk about, what's our goal for 5 years from now? Let's not be talking about the carrots, right? So, and then when it comes to strategic planning, I'm a firm believer, Three, I know you do this at your clubs as well, is you have specific strategic planning events, whether that you want to call it a meeting, whether you want to call it a workshop or a retreat or whatever, where the intention is the group is coming together to talk about the future, to create a long-term plan, to set goals that are for 5 to 10 years in advance. Again, we're not talking about next week or, next year. We're talking about truly the future.
Yeah, that's great stuff. And I think, Three, you talked about it earlier when you talk about you have to be on the offensive versus the defensive as a leader, right? As a manager. And I think so many managers, at least in my travels, you can see the managers that are on the offensive and comfortable in that position, right? Like you gotta want, if you're the quarterback, you gotta want the ball. Like
that's right.
You gotta want the ball. You can't hope someone else, the president or the chair or someone else has the ball and makes the decisions and calls the plays. You have to want to call the play. And I think the challenge that managers find themselves in, because we live in this surreal universe of having 800 bosses and having the thinking and the feeling and the emotion of that 800 bosses can flip on a switch with all kinds of different reasons. You know, you have a great chair one year and then they're only there for a year. And what can they do in a year besides push their own agenda sometimes and make whatever changes they want sometimes? But it's difficult to be on the offensive as a club manager. The reality is you have to really have a certain type of personality, a certain type of thick skin, a certain type of political skill of doing all the things that we're talking about. Like, you know, you can use stats all you want, but you're still going to have someone that says, yeah, but, you know, my buddy runs a restaurant and his food cost is 28%. You know, how I know, why is the club industry 42%? That's what everyone says, et cetera, right? So you talk about strategies about communicating and Jackie, you talk about retreats for strategic planning sessions. Are there other ways that you can? I think the next question, Scott, is about communication, about getting those kind of strategies up there. But are there some ways that you kind of, you know, like you said, is it part of the minutes? Is it you send them an email whenever you see something across your desk? You have a little blurb in the member update that talks about what's going on in the industry. Are there some strategies you suggest?
Well, hey, for me, I talk about it at every board meeting. There's some version of something going on, and they hear me say things like industry best practices. Here's what other clubs are doing. Jackie just wrote about this. I mean, like I really do, use those things a lot. The other thing too, and I'll just tell you, I'm going to go back just a tiny bit. You said something really good right there about how do you have the strength sort of to play offense. I make these jokes, because I find myself funny frequently with boards and whatever, the president, the vice president, the executive committee, where I'm like, guys, y'all are paying me to do this. And you guys are volunteers, and God bless you for doing that. But our reality is you guys, pay us to do this. So I do a lot to align with the executive committee, the club presidents, on the fact that we're doing these things. We're managing, we're leading, we're helping. We just need your support and assistance to keep moving down that road. And we try to have that kind of messaging with the boards, the committees, with everybody. To the bigger question about communication strategies, I think I'd tell you that, there's that cliche that is an old one that we've all heard about. You get out of it what you put into it. Man, if that isn't the gospel in this exact issue, right? Club managers are crazy busy. Like, I promise you, I know. And for us, getting those kind of regular updates, concise, consistent information is just so key. So trying to read things like magazines and being able to pass those on, newsletters, best practice stuff, and again, just sharing it, it really matters. But then annual onboarding. Guys, no one realizes, this club had been here 101 years, and the first absolute annual onboarding for its board happened 60 days ago. So 100.5, right? I mean, it's kind of hard to imagine, but like that's a real thing. So it's the same thing with committees. It's working one-on-one with your president and setting those standards of where we're going and how we're going to operate together. Data-driven reports help, especially on performance, membership trends, financial updates, progress on projects. You can't over-communicate. I mean, that's a huge one. Centralized digital communication platforms. Sometimes a lot of times it's GM, but like even having one person that communicates with kind of like a committee secretary who helps get information out so that isn't being owned by each chair. Like centralization of committees and board, that's a huge thing. Mm-hmm. We just implemented that here a few months ago, and that's been really, really big. And then finding a location like on your website, most of the companies will do some really cool stuff, not to mention you can buy board portals and all that kind of stuff, but having somewhere where you can put, all your information so that your committees can go there and grab that. And even old school things, like I just did my first governance manual, and the 3-ring binder that says governance. I mean, as old school as this is, all the data they need to get started is right here. And I think it's just giving them that information. These are smart people. When asked, will take a minute and learn from you.
Yeah, James, and I really think it's about finding out what works best for your club or that board, and that could change year to year. If it's something where they say, hey, we don't want an email with all the different things, put it in the board portal and send us an email, once a month with here's all the things that have been updated, and then it's our responsibility to go and do this. As I was creating Notable, I'm laughing because this was a source of contention in our marriage, was the Private Club Advisor was a printed publication. So
Right.
you could print it off and hand it to your board members or put it on their board binders or at their seat or whatever. And Three liked that. He wanted that. And I said, I know, but more boards and more clubs are going to the electronic version. So Notable, I compromised, and it is an electronic newsletter, but it's easy to print. So there it is. It's a two-way street. But that is one of the reasons that publication is so valuable, is because it's short, it's concise, and it's easy for a general manager to hand it to their board members and go, hey, page 2, I'd like to point out this article on, restaurant trends. Please make sure you read that one. There's also some other great information in there, but I'd love for you all to pay, attention to that. Okay, that's easy. You've called it out, you've made it a point, and it took 30 seconds, right? So I think finding out what works best, how you can make it easy. Three and I are all about how to make life easier for people. And so figure out what works for, your board. But the point is that you're doing it, right? Go ahead, Three, sorry.
And just a tiny communication strategy, and it's going to sound so remedial. Obviously, Jackie and I do a lot of public speaking. Every few months, and it sort of ebbs and flows depending on what's going on, but I do a PowerPoint for the board. So during my report, as opposed to it being 4 or 5 things and whatever, I literally go in, I've got a story to tell. This morning I came up with that idea, and here are my notes on what I think that should be, right? And it's about transition,
a visual element. Yeah.
And so I will do Thursday a PowerPoint that is very visual and represents a lot of visualization, so people understand. They have no concept what 60, 70 hours worth of work for 300-400 employees, really means behind the scenes, right? Mm-hmm. So we want people to understand how that is. And sometimes pictures of, I've got pictures of a big meeting that happened on a Monday night last night with some of the big culinary experts in the country standing here that no one knows about. Well, that's a good thing to communicate. You know about it. Well, that's not good enough.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Excellent stuff. All really, really good. We got a comment about, which I love, which is, how do you handle when the chair and the president wants the ball, which I love. And I don't think my answer, which is tell him he can't have it, or tell her she can't have it, is the right response. I will say that I used to have this boss that used to micromanage me a little bit, and I was becoming a new boss, actually, and I was worried he was going to micromanage me. So I used to write these monthly reports, and they were like extensive, right? Like details and facts and KPIs and 10, 12, 15, 20 pages sometimes, because in the very beginning he didn't think I had the skills to become the boss, right? And I know that after the 3rd month he never read them again. Like I know that in month 4 I could have just put gibberish down in Latin on page 4 to page 20, and he never would have known the difference, because I got his confidence in the beginning that
right.
The guy knows what he's doing. He's got his finger on the pulse of all the things that I want to micromanage. And I wanted to add one more thing, which is that if you give boards space to be creative in their minds, they're not going to think of positive things to talk about.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They're going to think about what's wrong and how do we fix it. And if it's the carrots or the French fries or Bill the bartender, that's what they will get into. So you really have to give them work that moves the thing along. But let's get back to Craig's great question, which is, the challenges of being a manager when a president or a board member or an entire board. I mean, for goodness sakes, there's a club that we have in our neighborhood that the members approve the budget, because that's how their bylaws were written 60 years ago. and no manager has ever been successful in changing that, right? So we all know there are unique situations in the world of club management. So any thoughts on that?
Go ahead, Three.
Jackie, you or me?
You go ahead.
Okay. So I would tell you that for me, I'm a direct, want to talk to people face to face, the whole thing. And I think it would be meeting one-on-one with that person that, wants to be seen as the president. And certainly that's a challenge because this is their moment in the sun, right? And so you want to honor that to like some degree. But then I think there has to be a very upfront conversation with the fact that operationally, the president isn't here running the club day to day. Help that person, if they want to own something, own some strategy, own some big picture culture issues. And again, try and focus them up on that. And, I've had very definitive conversations. For me to be successful, micro is not my deal. Not only do I create macro in my world, I mean, almost to a fault probably, but I play better in macro. Micro is a very tough thing. And I think communicating that fact and having some balance with understanding, depending on this person's background, they may really need this moment. And you have to sort of understand that and appreciate it, but then not let it interfere with the club's success. And if there's any possibility it's going to really interfere, then I'd start looking to the board as a whole to make sure that you can talk to some of the board members to make sure there's some balance there, because a club president isn't making day-to-day decisions. They shouldn't be, can't be the way the governance should be set up.
Yeah, I would just say, bring it back to everyone's roles, right? And being very clear about that. And then, like you kind of alluded to, Three, but give them, a project or multiple things and say, this is where you would be much better served as the club, president or whatever their title is, that this would be much more important and much more valuable to the club for you to focus on these three things versus how the carrots are cut in the kitchen. I got that, right? Like that's my role. So it kind of just explaining that and maybe having some tough conversations, which kind of suck sometimes, but are necessary, right?
Yeah, I agree.
The next question relates to what I think is something that is going on right now in such a significant way. Like it's unbelievable that pre-COVID, we were all freaking out about our lack of waiting list. And post-COVID, we're all spending millions of dollars on renovating the pool and putting in top tracer and, doing the bunkers. And it's unbelievable to me. And I say sometimes, look, if your club was broken before COVID, it's still broken unless you've somehow done something drastically different and improved your onboarding or your member sales or your experience or your service or your culture or the quality of your product, blah, 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 or your marketing. Like your 22% uptick is not because you've done something different. It's because a whole bunch of people that weren't golfing came back to golf again. And we better hope to goodness that it continues on for as long as possible. But my next question kind of is around the financial part of it, because yes, we get people on boards that come from different skill sets and different backgrounds, but not everyone has done a $4 million capital project or has understood capital planning, right? For long-term capital planning. I mean, you read every article from every consultant in North America, and what they're talking about is how to get your board to start having conversations about putting money away for asset management. And do you even have an asset management plan? And, does someone know the roof has to get replaced in 5 years, right? Before you buy a new $40,000, pizza oven. Not that I could go off topic, but, I guess my question is like, how do you bring your board along to that? Because those are not yes, you have a capital planning committee, whatever, they bring a report, but there's nothing, I'm not going to use the word, there's nothing that about those types of conversations. Those are hard, long-term, difficult conversations to get consensus around a table, let alone consensus, just even to have the conversation. So do you have any successful tools for that?
Well, it's going to sound a little bit like a broken record, but it's back to that issue of having the theme and the constant conversation of best practices in the industry, best practices in the industry. As a matter of fact, let me bring club benchmarking in, and we're going to do that for 2 years so I can show you line by line where the club is good and bad. And then we can make some decisions on, well, the food and beverage loses more money than it should. Perfect answer. We're going to focus on that because club benchmarking showed that we're off a little bit there, but we're really strong here, here, and here. Well, that makes members feel good. And it shows that, again, someone's whim, oh, we spent too much on a member party. Well, did we? Let's look at where we really stand in the crucial areas. Again, benchmarking, financial education and training. You have to remember, somebody may have heard something in the bar that suggests, oh my gosh, something is wrong, but their financial acumen is not as strong as, say, the club's treasurer or somebody, maybe who's a banker that's on your board. So when you're talking about it, also, you've got to think what's the lowest common denominator as it pertains to the educational conversation. I said it earlier when I talk about visual examples. At this club, we basically have 3 buckets of money: dues, capital dues, initiation, for simple thinking. We now have a graphic that literally shows 3 buckets with the revenue that comes in and the expenses that align with those buckets. Those are all best practices, but it's very hard for just people in the membership at large to have that in their head. Mm-hmm. So we show it, we teach it, because when people understand that, they go, oh yeah, okay, that makes sense. That kind of thing really, really helps. Mm-hmm. Talking about the industry as a whole, as I mentioned, what other clubs are doing, what's the club down the street doing? Sometimes it'd be like, oh, I played with a guy over at the club down the street and he said this. Yes, I talked to them. Here's what they're doing specifically. And I think those things really matter. Don't hesitate, especially if you feel like you're losing some confidence with a board, to bring in an external expert or advisor that literally conducts an education. That can be done during your onboarding process, or it can be just done on a certain subject. Again, I sound like a commercial for club benchmarking, but those guys have this thing where they will do a Zoom call with your board and talk about some of the strengths and weaknesses, of where you are financially as a club. And then I think the other thing is being wildly transparent, clear, consistent. I think that boosts your sort of board members' confidence and your credibility, kind of helps to ensure the decision making is, super effective.
Yeah, I think sometimes managers make the mistake of spending way too much time talking about all the things that are going well, and not talking enough about the things that are like, okay, I got it, but we only have 2 hours in this meeting. Can we talk about the things that need improvement? And often, sometimes, for lots of reasons, no one wants to admit we're failing in something or we're not doing well in something, and so we don't want to have those hard conversations. And I think if you do have them and you are more transparent, like you say, that builds confidence. It's like in a relationship, it's like you can't, everything's not all hunky dory. There's got to be ways to improve, and you got to be willing to have that conversation about that. Right. Three, you've talked about, going through 8 clubs, and we've all, as consultants, we obviously work with lots of clubs, and look, we're kidding ourselves if we think the clubs aren't weird places where politics and people's perceptions and rumors and all kinds of stuff doesn't overwhelm, for every club manager out there that's having fun, there is a club manager right now that's like, what the heck am I supposed to do to deal with this group? Like these, they won't stop talking about, this, that, and the other thing, and they don't buy in. They're not in it. They're not going to read the onboarding manual. They're not going to listen to the They think you're just whitewashing them with your other club management cronies that you get together with and go to conferences with in New Orleans, and you get together and talk about how you're gonna take advantage of these poor people. So there's obviously managers out there that are struggling with trying to find these ways. And you've mentioned lots of good things right now, but there are cases where it's just not working, and right, and so like same thing. I mean, sometimes you gotta think, is this the right club for me? Like, that's why they change coaches on professional sports teams, because the team stops listening. And it's time to go find a new team. And they always get hired somewhere else. It's like unbelievable to me. It's like they got, John Tortorella somehow keeps getting hired. That's a hockey reference for you, US.
Yeah, I gotcha. That was a good one. We're in Minnesota.
But do you have any experiences, Three, where, and Jackie, you too, obviously, and I guess that gets to, Jackie, from a private club advisor and now notable standpoint, when you're trying to educate, you're trying to get content, you're trying to find things, but there's going to be boards that resist professional development or education, and if you're a manager out there, and your board doesn't want to read it, doesn't want to look at it, doesn't believe it, he just wants to talk about operations, do you have any advice for them besides get the resume polished up?
Yeah. Well, Three, I'll start, and then please, you can jump in. But I would say, James, really dig into why they're resisting. And this can be maybe a little bit challenging. You might be really close to it, but what is the issue? Do they think they know everything? Do they think, is it you? I mean, as you said, you're already polishing up your resume, but is it you? Do they not believe you as a credible source? What exactly is the thing, right? And because when you kind of pinpoint it, I think it's a little bit easier to navigate and to manage. So if it's you as the general manager, you're not well liked, you don't have a lot of credibility, they don't trust you, then great. Who can you bring in? Or let the board, pick necessarily somebody to bring in, an outside expert to talk about it and all those things. I think really emphasizing the importance of education and development. And again, this is the way the world is moving, right? It wasn't very long ago where it was hard to invest in our employees. I mean, people first, right? But that is a reality of today's world. As a business person, you have to invest in it. You want to create an environment of continuous learning. That's where organizations thrive. And so weaving in some of that language, I think, to the board is to kind of draw it to their own businesses or make it a little bit more relatable. I think when clubs get involved, people get very, personal about it or emotional or whatever, and they don't necessarily think clearly, or they don't bring in kind of some of that business acumen, as we talked about earlier. And I think that can be a big piece. And then also comes back to this accountability thing of reminding everybody of their roles and what their responsibility, and they have an accountability to be learning, to be doing their best, all their kind of fiduciary responsibilities. It requires them to be learning and understanding the industry and paying attention to make the best decisions possible. So kind of a little bit of turn it back on them and say, then you are not holding up your role as a board member of this club, right? So I think there's some ways to really do that. And then Three, my last one here is when it is happening, or when people are learning or paying attention or seeking out information or wanting to kind of engage in the learning process and be educated as board members, celebrate the crap out of that. I mean, recognize them and draw it out and make it like, the good kid on the bus, right? That's doing the right thing. So what more can you do? Three, sorry, go ahead. What would you
No, those are really, really great. I'll tell you, this is hard. This is the hard one, right? And I'll tell you, maybe I have two thoughts. And one, speaking as a general manager to a lot of people that are club leaders, right? Put your head down and do what's right. Mm. At the end of the day, man, it's hard, but do what's right. And I would tell you, and it takes great courage, it creates great strength. Yes, you may be polishing up your resume, but I would sit down with the president or the exec, say, I want to have a meeting. I have an agenda. Get one or the group together and say, guys, I've got to understand why these things aren't working. Mm-hmm. I've got to understand why I can't get the board on the right page, because I can't lead. Mm-hmm. I can't be successful. Our team can't be successful, not just me. But we can't be successful if the board and the management of this club globally, golf pro, superintendent, chef, etc., are misaligned. I can't lead if we are misaligned. Those things have to be in harmony, right? And there can't be anybody who doesn't believe that's right. So then you have to push with the exec, the president, whoever it is, and say, well, that's fine if you think it's me. That's like the worst case answer, right? But you could have in the room the golf pro, the superintendent, the chef, all these people that are working towards the same thing. And not just you are saying it, we are saying it. Mm-hmm. There's just a lot of ways to approach it. But I'll tell you, I think you've got to take it head on. And I know that's hard. I mean, I've been there, done that. It's tough.
Yeah. I think, I'm a big believer in surveys. I just because I've seen the success, for everyone that wants to yell from the rooftops, there's someone that wants to write from the basement, and they're both, their opinions are just as valuable. Mm-hmm. And creating an environment where people are giving honest, constructive, transparent feedback. I think I just filled a survey out this morning for the club, one of the clubs that I'm a member at, and I'm always looking for those leading questions. It's like if we renovate the fitness room, do you want a one-time assessment or a dues increase? I go, I didn't agree to the renovating the fitness room for goodness sake. Like, don't try to trick me. So you've got to be careful about all those things, but I don't see enough clubs doing board self-evaluations on an annual basis. I don't see enough clubs doing exit interviews with board members when they leave. I don't see enough clubs doing really thorough, effective onboarding of new board members and committee members. Whether it's even having the committee having a clear vision about what their responsibility is and what their role is as a committee, because once again, you have to have these goalposts so that people don't play a different game. There's got to be a way to keep score, right? And I think that's a question that comes up, Scott, which is, how do you know if you're being successful or not with regards to, like how do you know you're being successful? I mean, obviously, alignment, staying on track, long-term planning. Surveying, I mean, all those things are one way. You're how well you sleep at night. That's another probably measure. But are there some other things that you feel like you can determine that you would use to get feedback from whether or not your efforts are being successful?
I think a simple old school one about creating that sort of unified leadership, that alignment that we talked about between the management team and the board, is not only talking to each one of your direct reports, again, golf pro, superintendent, chef, whatever that is, but also going and having the conversation with some of the board members, the committee chairs. Most of the time that is board members, obviously. And so, where are there disconnects? What are things we can do to bring stronger alignment together and have those conversations? They see you leading that process. That does nothing but gain credibility. Jackie, I'll throw it at you. I know you've got some really strong ones here.
Well, if there's any KPIs, I mean, you kind of talked about it, right? Self-assessments, KPIs that you can measure specifically, what that might look like. I kind of go back to evaluating board dynamics and the sort of decision-making process, how painful is it, to get through something. But one of the things I would say is I'm always a big proponent of what does the experience look like? And I know, people first is all about the employee experience, but also what is the board member experience? What's the committee member experience? What's the general manager experience? The department heads? Are people having a positive experience? Because I feel like that's a good benchmark or a good baseline of, is there a lot of frustration? Then what could we do differently to make this better? Or is it I wasn't supposed to do that. I told you. I'm sorry. Effing brutal. I'm sorry. Scott, break that out. Is it painful to be a board member? I didn't say sexy. I wanted to say sexy.
That's okay. You got it. That's
painful to be a board member, right? Like, do you not want to come to the club after you're a board member? 3, stop laughing. My face is turning red. I'm embarrassed.
You always swear on our stuff. It's totally
told me
fine.
at the beginning
Totally
I
fine.
would be the one to swear, and then it came true. I'm sorry. If
Self-fulfilling prophecy. You put it in the universe.
Anyway, so just kind of coming back to the experience level, right? And are people truly enjoying it? That might be a very simple one, but I feel like when everyone's really working together and doing what they're supposed to be doing, people are kind of enjoying it more, right? And they're having a better time.
Yeah, and I you hit the nail on the head with your exclamation point, which is that it's true. Like, being a board member can be a thankless job. I mean,
Absolutely.
a completely thankless volunteer job. I mean, I was the president of my club for 6 years, and I can tell you, no one was patting me on the back when I was walking down the hockey hallway. It was when's the ice getting fixed, and how come the tennis court lights suck, or whatever it might be, right? So it's a thankless job, and I think as a leader, part of giving the board vision and clarity is also finding ways to give them benefits.
Yeah.
Like what are the benefits? Is besides a parking spot, what is the benefit of being on the board? And I think that comes back full circle to the education part.
Right.
Like, one of the benefits is that you actually can learn a whole bunch about the industry, about governance, about clubs. It's better to sit at the bar being knowledgeable than to be able to say, I have no idea. Why are we losing $500,000 of food and beverage bill, or Susan? Well, let me tell you. Let me tell you, actually, based on our club size, based on our neighbors, based on what's going down on the street, we're actually should be losing 700, and the staff's doing an unbelievable job that we're only losing 500 because 4 years ago we were losing $1 million. It's better than saying I have no idea, right? And then you put them in that awkward position of not having knowledge and saying, well, then why are you on the board if you have no idea?
Right.
Jackie, you notable is the fair to say the replacement of Private Club Advisor, right? And it's distributed to clubs all over the place. The first issue just went out the other day. It is intended, my understanding of it is that the whole purpose is that it's read by GMs and presidents together. It's read by boards and managers together because it's got that tone of this is what's going to help everybody. Tell us more about the content, about what your aims for, how do people find it, and all those types of things.
Yeah. So I took all of the good things from the Private Club Advisor and kind of moved it over to Notable. I updated the layout, kind of what it looks like. My goal is that Notable is a resource, a piece of education that a general manager can easily give to their board member, whether that's a hard copy or an electronic, version of it. But it's something where the GM can feel proud that they're providing good education that can help with decision making, that can give them some kind of industry perspective, right? So that's truly where it comes from. Again, I'm married to a GM. I get the complexity of the industry, the frustration of it. I get how you don't have a lot of time. Sometimes people don't have a lot of money to spend on these resources. So Notable is really intended to be that for general managers. I tried to make it easy so you can print off an article and give it to a committee if you want, or you can print the whole thing out, or you can email it to your department heads, or you can kind of call out specific things. Or if there's a survey that it references that really speaks to you, you can click the link and go read the whole stinking survey that's 42 pages long, but I pulled out 3 paragraphs that I thought were the most important. So that's really what it's intended to be, and it's my hope. I mean, I'm coming at it as the hope to be the third party person that's reinforcing what you're telling your board, right? As a support mechanism. Absolutely.
I think just really quick too, one of the things that makes it interesting is you've always done a good job of summarizing the data of literally North America's experts on whatever topic.
Sure.
Now you're not only summarizing the data so that GMs can get that really important stuff, but then you're handing them all the backup. Mm-hmm. And the combination of those things with Notable obviously I'm a fan, but it's really a important evolution of that education for all of us.
Well, I know the first issue just dropped, right?
Yeah.
Like last week. Your
Yeah.
website just live last week. Issues go out monthly.
Monthly, yes.
Monthly.
It's conveniently timed with, board meetings as well, like monthly board meetings. So yeah.
Yeah. I love it. So look, for listeners, Gig Nation, anybody else that's watching or is going to listen to this recorded, check out Notable, because it accomplishes many of the things we've talked about today, which is the importance of creating an environment of educating your board and committees and presidents on the industry, on the challenges, on the best practices, on the KPIs, on all of the stuff that they have questions about, but that we want to help them so that they're not worried about French fries. Instead, they're understanding where your club sits compared to the rest of the club industry. So Three and Jackie, wonderful to have you. Always a pleasure. We got all the words in that we wanted and one that we weren't expecting, but we knew might come. So that's always positive.
We did hit our sexy goal. We
totally hit our sexy goal. Yeah, and Charlie learned another word. If Charlie was listening to the podcast in the background, Charlie learned another word today as every people needs to learn. But ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being on our podcast and on our live Q&A call. We look forward to seeing you again soon. And until then, we, as always, will see you on the inside.